Hey guys, it's Selwen here. Today let's talk about the Unholy Decay. Here your abilities is gonna be all about diseases and all kinds of nasty gooey stuff to deal damage, from your virulent plague natural spread to the application of festering wounds to burst them in all its nasty glory, to your pets in army of ghouls. The visual spectacle in Unholy in combination with your damage is quite a sight to behold. Unholy also requires some ramping up in order to perform well, and the way your wounds work can make target switching a bit of an annoyance. Like for us, your resources are divided into two, runes and runic power, which feed off each other. Each rune consumption, which comes from most of your abilities, in turn build your runic power, 10 per rune, which is mostly gonna be spent on death coils. But before going over that, let's talk them talents. So Unholy talents are still sort of divided by what you're gonna require on some fights, the typical AoE and single target. So here on the first tier we get All Will Serve and Clawing Shadows. Both of these first talents present equal DPS benefits with some slight differences. Clawing Shadows will replace a Scourge Strike, adding the bonus of a 30-yard range, meaning you can damage mobs from afar, and changing its damage component of half physical and half shadow damage to be fully shadow, meaning it will deal more damage overall because your mastery improves your shadow damage, scaling better in the long run. This also makes it the strongest choice for AoE scenarios, since Death and Decay makes Scourge Strike / Clawing Shadows cleave targets, so more cleave damage as well. Now currently All Will Serve offers the same, if not a slight higher DPS increase in pure single target encounters. A pretty boring one, just an extra pet, so not much to talk about it. As the expansion goes on, you might expect Clawing Shadows to most likely pull ahead once your gear gets better and better. If you happen to have it in AoE, All Will Serve that is not a huge loss, it's actually rather decent, just not the best. Infected Claws is only to be used with AoE, your pet attacks have a chance to apply a wound, and with Dark Transformation CD, your pet actually cleaves, meaning more wounds that you can burst with that Death and Decay cleave, and with Bursting Source talent on the second tier can result in pretty nice and fun moments. It's completely viable for things like Mythic Plus, as some might argue Clawing Shadows has the slight DPS advantage, but if you really like Infected Claws like myself, you are totally in the clear to get it. On the next tier, so the Bursting Source improves your wounds to deal more damage when you burst them, plus AoEs all around the target. Clearly an option only to be used in AoE or cleave, so amazing for Mythic Plus. Great to combine with Infected Claws, although you don't necessarily need it, like I said before. Ebon Fever will make your Virulent Plague deal 15% more damage in half the duration, and this is a clear winner for a single target. Works for AoE as well, although not as good as Bursting Source. Unholy Blight is a new ability to use on a 45-second cooldown, adds yet another dot, is pretty decent for AoE, also works for single target, but comparing to the others is just weaker overall. Following tier is just utility like talents, so choose whichever you prefer the most or need the most. I tend to go for Death's Reach for those delicious grips in dungeons, but the slow in Death and Decay is equally good, and even the stun, so yeah, go for what you prefer again. And the fourth tier we get Soul Reaper. Is once again a new ability, dealing damage over time, and if the target dies while it's up, you gain 10% haste. On raid bosses, you're never gonna take advantage out of that extra bonus unless there's ads. But what's good about it is that it generates 2 runes, so it's something that you would use on cooldown to get some runes back, much like Horn of Winter works in the Frosty case or the Old Apocalypse. Currently the best option for both single targets and AoE like Mythic Plus, especially since you can get that haste bonus on trash packs. That said, if you don't want the hassle of yet another button to click, Pestilent Pustules is still decent, completely passive, so it's easier to manage. Each festering wound that you burst has a 10% chance to grant Runic Corruption. Runic Corruption is a passive that gives you a buff for just a few seconds, regenerating your runes much faster. Only proccable from Runic Power spending abilities, this also adds it to those wounds, so same effect as Soul Reaper in the end, but not as controllable with that RNG spice on top. Harbinger of Doom allows your Sudden Doom to proc 15% more often, so your Death Coil procs, and you have to charges. This is your old artifact trait and currently is quite weak because one, the benefits that it offers is just weaker overall, and where this will be the most worthwhile is with the last tier talent called Summon Gargoyle or the old Dark Arbiter, which is currently quite weak as well, but I'll talk about it later for the sake of completion because hey, might get OP in the future. Next tier we get defensive type of talents or mobility ones like Wraithwalk, so choose what you're gonna need or prefer, they are really great ones. And tier 6 we get AoE choices. Epidemic, which is great, costing runic power, so it's essentially an AoE death coil, the go-to for Mythic Plus or AoE fights for the most part. Now both Pestilence and Defile, even though technically AoE focused, are gonna be used for single targets, simply because Epidemic is mostly useless there, and in AoE they are still pretty great, especially Pestilence. Kinda ends up being a personal choice. I stand behind Epidemic because I love the way that it works, but you can disagree. Their DPS differences between each other in single target are not huge, and in the overall scheme of things are not going to provide a huge DPS increase, but still a noticeable one. Both will require you to use Death and Decay on cooldown, granted that you will be able to make it hit the boss for its full duration. The Defile is just going to make Death and Decay damage higher, and the Pestilence a small chance to add a wound. Pestilence does seem to have the bigger benefits and impact, but choose what you prefer. And then on the last tier, Summon Gargoyle sadly is the weakest, adding a new cooldown where a large part of your gameplay will be based around using it, but more on that later. And Holy Frenzy at this point in time is the best choice for any situation. Is also a new cooldown, increasing your haste to 20% and auto attacks apply a wound, so just more wounds in general, and working like a mini Bloodlust on a relative short cooldown. Army of the Damned will improve your pet's cooldowns. Death Coil and Epidemic will reduce Apocalypse cooldown by 1 second, an Army of the Dead by 5, easier talent to manage and it works, but not as good as and Holy Frenzy. With that covered, let's start with the actual rotation and priorities, starting with single target, with the best talent choices that are currently that I went over, then going over Gargoyle, and of course AoE. But before going to the cooldowns and all of that, let's get the general idea of how to play your Unholy Decay. So the main idea with Unholy is to keep up your dots at all times, and the wounds mechanic is what you're gonna be doing 80% of the time, building wounds and bursting them. Virulent Plague or Outbreak is a way to apply your dot. It just spreads all around for a few seconds. Keeping this up will be your main priority, so don't let it drop. Now the way your wounds work is that they are applied mainly from Festering Strikes, which costs 2 runes, and the other means coming from talents, but we'll get there. Now Festering Strike can apply 2 to 3 stacks, and they cap at 6, meaning you only gonna be using Festering Strikes when you have no wounds, or at 4 or below, because one of your cooldowns called Apocalypse that requires 4, more on that in a bit. But taking that cooldown out of the equation, you only want to use Festering Strikes when you have no wounds, so you can actually burst them. Now, how do you burst them in the first place? The main way to do that is through Scourge Strikes, dealing some damage and bursting 1 wound at the cost of 1 rune. Putting it simply is about applying the said wounds and bursting them. That's what you're gonna do most of the time. That said, as you are spending those runes and as you burst wounds, you're gonna be building runic power, and your auto attacks have a chance to give you a proc called Sudden Doom, making your Death Coil free to use. Death Coils are your main way to dump the runic power that you are generating from the runes, so generally whenever you are above 80 or so runic power, you use the Death Coil, or when you have nothing else available to use at the time, because spending runic power has that small chance to proc Runic Corruption, that short buff to increase the speed of your rune regeneration, getting them far faster and in turn more Scourge and fast rank strikes to use and wounds to burst. The proc follows the same idea, although you want to use it as quickly as possible, as they can proc from auto attacks, they can happen at any time. Main things you want to avoid is Scourge Strike at 0 wounds, Festering Strikes above 4, and using rune costing abilities when too close to the cap. You never want to overcap resources. Downtimes is something that you will find in Unholy, and you want to minimize that the best you can. This will be the way to start doing it. Now there are other abilities to talk about that you're going to use fairly often, Dark Transformation and Death and Decay, and with either Defile or Pestilence. Now Dark Transformation has the same priority as Virulent Plague. It's available and use it as fast as you can, so after that first Virulent Plague, because Death Coil actually reduces its cooldown by 1 second, meaning you want it on cooldown before you actually start your rotation, and in turn the coils to maximize its uses. Death and Decay, with those talents, you want to use it on cooldown also, usually before you're gonna start popping those wounds, so when you are on that Scourge Strike spam, you have some lucky wounds appearing with each tick, if with Pestilence that is, but the rest stays the same. But what about Unholy Frenzy, Soul Reaper, and even Army of the Dead? Well, to talk about them, we can jump to the opener section where they will make the most sense, and then go from there. Now, Army of the Dead is an extremely powerful cooldown that you can only really use once per fight, unless you with Army of the Damned talent. Because of that, you want to make the most out of it. The general rule tends to be to use it with Bloodlust, since all of your pets benefit from haste values, so Bloodlust is gonna benefit your Army of the Dead highly, and in this case is just an example, but let's just imagine there will be a Blust at the pool, so you would precast it right as the pool is about to go down, so as you are walking towards a boss or something. After, you will apply your Virulent Plague, remember your highest priority dot, then Dark Transformation for the same reasons as before. Once you get close to the boss, you would then pop your Unholy Frenzy. Unholy Frenzy is just making things go overall faster due to the haste, so you'll be able to fit more wound bursts, your dots are gonna tick faster, runes are gonna generate quicker, and even your pets will attack more frequently. But the biggest benefit will come from those wounds that are gonna be applied with auto attacks, minimizing the need for festering strikes, and instead just go on wound bursting spam. But before that, you want to pop your Apocalypse. Essentially is a big Scourge Strike. Instead of bursting 1, it will burst 4 wounds and summon a ghoul per wound burst. In general, using on cooldown when you add 4 wounds will be your goal, so you're gonna use a single Festering Strike to reach your 4. That together with Unholy Frenzy should be easily achievable. Sometimes you might have to use 2 Festering Strikes to reach that 4. In the middle of this, if you see that you're too close to the cap of runic power, feel free to fill in with a Death Coil, remember your priorities from before. After this is all set up, check for any sudden doom procs before you move on for the next step, which will be your Death and Decay with Pestilence or Defile, and then finally go on that wound burst spam. Remember that they are being applied from both Unholy Frenzy and Pestilence, so you can just hammer that Scourge Strike button, only needing to refresh Virulent Plague when necessary, and once all of that ends, resume your normal rotation, using Festering Strike when in need of wounds, and etc. Now, there's one ability missing, as you might have noticed, and it is Soul Reaper. Soul Reaper is to be used whenever you below 2 runes. You might have used it in your opener or sometime during that wound bursting spam, but try to use it on cooldown whenever you're in need of runes. As for your CDs mid-fight, Apocalypse again use on cooldown with 4 wounds, Unholy Frenzy the same as your opener. Make sure you have at least 2 or 3 runes to actually have some Scourge Strikes to use to burst those said wounds. Also try to go with lowish runic power so you don't have to interrupt your wound bursting for a Death Coil. Now, stacking Unholy Frenzy with your pets, so Dark Transformation or Apocalypse, is something that you want to try and aim. In your opener, this was fairly easy to do. That said, it can be difficult since their cooldown timers are all over the place, so don't hold out on your CDs because of them, but if the opportunity shows itself, do stack your CDs. All of that said, your opener can change a little bit if you're not using Army of the Dead on pull. The only change would be after the Outbreak and Dark Transformation to go for 2 Festering Strikes instead, then Apocalypse, and only then the Unholy Frenzy and the Death and Decay. The reason for this is that you don't have to use it as early because Army of the Dead isn't up. Now on to AoE. AoE here is actually not gonna change much when you use things like Bursting Swords. A lot of your AoE damage is gonna come off naturally. It is one of the most satisfying ones though, but the overall priorities stay the same here. Remember, Dark Transformation cleaves, and Apocalypse with the Bursting Swords talent provides a sort of big wound burst sort of AoE. But the bread and butter of Unholy AoE is on your wound burst together with Death and Decay. And Holy Frenzy can make this even better as well for the same reasons as single target. So instead of just applying wounds on your main target, you want to be applying on as many targets as you can, or get infected claws to make your pet do it for you. Once that's done, you pop Death and Decay, and once again smash that Scourge Strike button, bursting all of the wounds and bring on those nasty gooey effects, and than numbers. When you get high on runic power, you can start using Epidemic to just dump some of it. Same idea as a Death Coil. Here you can be a bit more lenient with its uses as it provides a pretty good AoE burst. If you get Death Coil procs, you won't use them anyway, and unless it's really huge packs, like more than 5 mobs or something. At that point, just forget Death Coil. The damage isn't that meaningful in AoE, but is still reducing Dark Transformation CD for free. Epidemic does not, so take that in mind. And Dark Transformation, even without Infected Claws, is still a pretty powerful AoE ability. With that covered, there's only one last thing to talk about, and it is Summon Gargoyle or Dark Arbiter. Now the idea here, priorities and all of that outside of the cooldown itself and its preparation, is the same as before. That said, in your opener or any time that you are going to use it, there's some preparation to be done. So you would still go for that Army of the Dead pre-pool if with Bloodlust and Dark Transformation. But when you start those Festering Strikes and bursting those wounds and using that Apocalypse like before, you're not going to use any Death Coils, not even the procs, because the idea with Gargoyle is that spending runic power with it active will increase its damage, so you want to pull as many runic power as you can, and the procs if possible. Even though they are free of runic power, they still benefit Gargoyle. So when you are around 80, so close to the cap, you finally pop it, and while it's up, your main priorities are gonna shift. Death Coil is something that you want to use when available, becoming priority number 1. So at first, you're gonna spam them, emptying all of that runic power and procs. Then you're gonna build more runic power through the same ways and priorities as before, so Festering Strikes for wounds, then bursting them, keeping up with your dot. Do not spam Festering Strikes just because it costs 2 runes. Bursting wounds with Scourge Strikes still provides a higher runic power generation over it, but instead of getting high on runic power before using the coil, you get it and you use it, so you keep boosting that Gargoyle as fast as you can. Once it goes down, you resume the rotation priorities, and when you're about to use it again mid-fight, same as your opener, prepare that runic power and procs before using it. And yeah, that covers it all. As for stats and traits and all of that good stuff, strength, so item level is always going to be your strongest stat. As for secondary ones, currently haste is actually rather powerful, quickly followed by that is crit and verse. Weirdly, mastery is showing be the weakest, but steaming your character will be the sure way to go. As for traits, Faster Might is one of the main reasons why it makes Unholy Frenzy such a powerful build, as Bursting Swords increases strength, but the typical Thunderous Blast and the Laser Matrix are also really powerful at this point in time. Remember to check the sources I have listed in the description to keep you up to date with the most powerful traits. And yeah guys, that does it for Unholy. As always, thank you for watching, remember to subscribe and like to get more videos like this, and check out my Patreon if you wish to support the channel, and I'll see you all next time. See ya.